The purpose of this video is to get us writing some programs in C# and introduce us to data types and how they work in C#. So just to reiterate what we've already done, we're going to create a new project. Again, I'm using Visual Studio 2015, and we're going to create a new project. And we're going to watch that spin for a little bit. We're going to do a C# project. We are going to do a console application. We'll give this particular one a name like data. I'm going to call this one data types. I think I already have one in here, so I'm going to give it a 1. So we're going to give it a name of data types, which is also going to give it a solution name. Make sure we check on the create directory for solution and choose OK. And it's going to create our project for us, and boom. All right. So remember, we have our Solution Explorer, and we have our program.cs file, which is the file that we're working on to create our source code. And I'm just bringing to your attention some things we didn't look at in our last video. We have using statements, and using statements are code that somebody else has written that's going to give us the ability to do things that we don't have to write the code for. Somebody else has written the code for us already. And so anytime we write C#, we always want this using system directive for sure. But notice this little light bulb is concerned because it's trying to let you know that there's some, as far as it understands at this point in time, there's a bunch of using statements or a bunch of code that we are allowing ourselves access to that we're not currently using. And so this is another way we can say, well, let's go ahead and remove the unnecessary ones. Only problem with that is it also removed our system. So I'm going to add that one back in. So really at this point in time, all we really need is this system library, so to speak, because that's what's giving us access to the C# files and the C# compiler and all of those things. And also our being able to write our code to the window. And then eventually we'll see being able to get code. But remember, we also then could put in using static system.console, which is what's allowing us our read and write to the console. And so this way we don't have to keep writing system console down in our code when we want to write out lines of code. I'll reiterate that in a moment. But now we want to talk about data types. And we want to know that, or you should know that C# is what's called a strong typed language, meaning that it has to be very clear what the values of your data types are. Not the values per se, well, values too, but what type of data are you planning on using with your variables? For example, if I wanted to create a name, like I want to write my name equals Kirsten, and I'm going to put that into a variable equals Kirsten, and I'm putting it in a string in quotes. Notice I've got these squiggly red lines, and the squiggly red lines is saying that doesn't exist in the current document, in the current context. That's because we need to tell C# ahead of time what data type name is going to be. So now we don't have a red squiggly line, we have a green one, and I'll explain that in a minute. So anytime we create a variable, before we can use it, we have to tell C# ahead of time what data type, what type of data is going to be put into this variable. What is the little green squiggly then telling me? Well, it's saying green means it's okay in the short run, but you have a variable that you haven't done anything with. We've put something in, but we haven't done anything with it, which is okay. We'll print it out in a minute. So in other words, if I put write, let's just say I write name, now the little green squiggly line goes away and everybody's happy. So let's just reiterate the point with this static here. If I didn't put this line, I'm just going to cut it out for the moment. Now I get, and I should get an error here. It says what the red line is saying is, I don't know, C#'s telling you, I don't know what write is. I don't know where to look to find write. And we could then type out, well, if you look in the system library in the console class, you'll find a method called write, and we'll understand all these things as we go along. You'll find a method called write, and that gives you the directions on how to write this to our console. That gives you the code that does that. If I don't want to write system console all the time, remember that's why we put it up here. And now we do what's called qualified, we don't have to write out system console every time now. So either way is correct. This is just easier to type. Anyway, back to the point of data types. We now have a string variable called name, and we've put in a variable, a string literally this value, put that into name and write that out. Okay, fantastic. Notice green lines versus yellow lines. That means I haven't saved. So if I save, everything goes green. Okay, so that's fantastic. All right, so now let's think about what other data types we might be interested in. Well, there's integers. So I could, let's do a, develop an application that does some averaging of grades. So I'm going to create 2 grades and we'll create the average. Granted, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense in the long run, but in the short run, it just gives us some examples of what we can do. All right, so I'm going to create grade 2 variables that's going to obviously have 2 grades associated with it. And then I guess at the end, we want to calculate the final grade. Final grade. Okay, so fantastic. So let's see, let's assign values. Grade 1, we'll give grade 1, Kirsten gets 89.3 on her first exam. We've got a red squiggly line. Well, I can't assign a floating point or a decimal point to an integer. Remember, an integer is a whole number. So I'm getting this error message that says represents a double precision floating point number. So what we're trying to, and at the bottom there, cannot implicitly convert type double to int. So what's happening here is I'm giving a decimal value, assigning it to a variable that I set as an integer, and C# is saying, can't put a decimal value into an integer, so I'm going to give you the ugly red throw up line. So let's make that an integer then. And there goes that. Okay, so grade 2 equals, oh, let's say I didn't do so well on that one. Fantastic. Okay, so now everything is no red squiggly lines, so that's good. I have 2 values. And that's fine. Now, incidentally, if you want, this is viable. If you know at the time that you're creating the variable, you can put that value, you can initialize the value at the same time you're creating the variable. There's nothing wrong with that. So either of those are correct. So I can do that. Okay, so now I'm getting these green squiggly lines because I'm not actually printing anything out. So let's go ahead and concatenate. In other words, join some information together. So Kirsten is what's going to be in the variable name. I'm going to put an apostrophe S. Final score, or final grade. Let's do that. Final grade is, and then we'll do a concatenator, and we'll put final grade here. So whatever my final grade calculates out to, we'll go here. Red squiggly line says, it doesn't have a value. I can't print something out for you that doesn't have a value. So, okay, let's then do a calculation. Final grade equals grade 1 divided by, gotta get my algorithm right, grade 2. And we will divide that by 2. Whew, okay, that should do it. Yep, no red squiggly lines. And I can hit my run, says start debugging, or I can, probably the easiest right there, or you can hit debug, start debugging, or we're going to do for the moment start without debugging. So we'll let it run. And Kirsten's final grade is 82. Press any key to continue. Fantastic. All right, so that's looking good. Maybe at the end here, I might put a new line. Okay, fantastic. All right, so let's look at a little bit more detail now. So we've got int, that's good. What about that situation where we had, we wanted to have some decimals maybe? So let's make final grade a decimal. So if we divide 2 values, we want to get the GPA with the decimal ending. It turns out that there are 2 different types of decimals. One is called double, which is the default in C#, and another is floating point. But in this video, we're going to deal with double, and double is what we're going to think of for decimals. and it is the default for C#. So now if I run this, let's see what happens. Will this work? Let's see. And oh, I need to, if I do that without debugging, then I need to put the read key so it doesn't go away so quickly. So those are the two caveats there. So we'll do this again, start debugging, and then I should be able to see, okay, so it's waiting. So yeah, so that's working out just fine, but I really kind of wanted a decimal. So now I have to start thinking about, well, what can I do to get the decimal portion of that? But final grade is a double. That's true, but we are dividing by integers, aren't we? So we need to make these integers, or doubles instead, excuse me. So instead of ints, let's change these to doubles and see if that gives us any different output. Double. Yep, okay. Now let's try that and see what we get. Oh, we're still not getting. Why is that? Well, because they're still integers, I suppose. So if we gave it some decimal values, maybe that'll change our lives a little bit. All right, let's see. And now we're starting to get some decimals. So let's take this another step further just to reiterate some obvious points here. So we have, this is grade 1 is a double and grade 2 is a double. But what would happen if we had made final grade an integer? Would that work? Well, we're getting an error already because the syntax checker is letting us know that you can't put the value, you're trying to divide two doubles and you're putting that into an integer. And I don't know how to convert a double to an integer, so it's just giving you this little error right off the bat. You can't play that game. All right, but can I think we've already seen that I can do, an int can fit into a double. That makes sense, right? So that's not going to give me an error message. But I can't do this as an int because I have this assigned as a float. So I'm doing this intentionally because I highly suggest that you think about the difference between integers and doubles. And I think you're starting to see the idea that because C# is strongly typed, it's going to be very sensitive to the types of data and the calculations you're using, as we've seen in this video. So ints and doubles are something you're probably going to be using a lot of. And I'm sure you're comfortable already from your prior programming language what the difference is between an int and a double. But now we're starting to see that in C# for sure that we're going to have to declare ahead of time our variables. We're going to have to determine or state ahead of time what data type is that variable going to be used for. And then we can either give it a value at that time or we can give it a value at another time. For example, here we assigned final grade a value after we declared it. So either of those is correct, but starting to get comfortable with the strong type language is a key to success in C#.